Let me bring my panel out, if I could. So we have Aaron Fetters, who's Associate Director of Global Digital Strategy and Analytics at Kellogg's. We have Scott McDonald, who I think many of you here in New York know, Senior VP of Research at Condé Nast. And then we have Keith Camusa, North America Head of Research at Universal McCann. Gentlemen, if you take a seat, I'll get started here. So the reason that the question was, that was just asked was particularly intriguing to us on this panel is that we're going to be talking about cross-media metrics that might be relevant as we move from more of a single medium world, if you will, as it used to be, to a multimedia world that we're getting into today. So I want to show you as foundation for this discussion, if I could, if I get these slides up here, I want to show you some slides and some information that I think will set the scene then as we talk about these issues. So about 5 years ago, one of our clients, who happened to be one of the larger advertisers in the world, asked us if we would measure how ads were falling in the digital world. And the reason that came about is that as this client started moving dollars from traditional media and from television to the internet, senior management was really surprised to discover that the make goods and the guarantees that they had been used to in the TV world weren't available in digital, and started to wonder as to how these ads were falling. Certainly they were being promised a lot, but wanted to understand the reality of how it was being delivered. So they tagged 8 campaigns for us, and we measured them as they fell against the ComScore panel. And the results, as you see here, left a lot to be desired, because a lot of the ads weren't hitting the targets. Some of the ads weren't even in the United States. Some were hitting with the right frequency. Some were hitting with the wrong frequency. And it set us off at ComScore on an investigation and the development of services that are now coming to final fruition here. So over the past 5 years, we've run about 2,500 studies of how these ads that are running in the digital world are falling. Here are some of the clients we've run it for. And in total, it covered 120 advertisers in 28 different countries. I just want to show you now in my final 2 slides, before we go to the panel, what we discovered that I think is going to set us up well for the future, but some issues to address. Cookies, first of all, are the main tool that's used to deliver these digital ads. And it's simply a piece of code that's put on a browser that identifies the machine. Some people think it identifies the person, and it doesn't. Another problem is that these cookies are getting deleted, and they're getting deleted, unfortunately, at an increasing rate as the browsers get set to automatically delete if you want every time you log on to the internet. So the numbers, all these are empirically measured. 30% of internet users will delete their cookies in a month, and they'll do so at a rate of anywhere between 3 to 7 times per month. True for website cookies, first-party cookies, as well as the ad service. Actually, a little higher for ad service than the website service. And that deletion will inherently, it'll inflate the frequency of delivery of impressions, and it'll deflate the reach. The ad service sees a machine that's had the cookie deleted off of it. It thinks it's a new machine. It puts another ad on. The cookie gets deleted. Another ad gets put on, et cetera. And you can get a delivery of a plan that's not what you intended. Cookie is not a person. Multiple users on a machine. 2/3 of US internet users are on multiple user computers. That causes a problem. The cookie also won't tell you who is using a machine if the login user then goes off somewhere else but leaves himself or herself logged in. And we've measured now 30% of the time when somebody's logged into Facebook, there's somebody else that's using the computer, which causes identification problems. And then targeting accuracy leaves something to be desired. It's not bad for one demo, 70% accuracy, 48% if you add another demo, you get 2 demos, it drops further for 3 demos. And then behavioral targeting, about 1/3 of the impressions delivered as they should be, and then 2/3 are off against the wrong target audience. And then finally, and most recently, we've measured the degree to which the ads are seen or visible, I should say, to the end user. And to me, the analogy here is with television. If you recall, when we moved from show ratings to commercial ratings, and the show rating numbers were higher, so we have in the digital world, on average, about 30% of the impressions were delivered. This is true in the US, it's true in Europe, it's true in Asia Pac. They're never visible by the end user. Most of the time, they're delivered below the fold, but the ad server counts it as delivered, and the user never scrolls down, never gets an opportunity to see the ad. Interestingly, if you look at the deletion rates, they do vary dramatically by site, low of 1% to a high of 100%. Placement, it improves but doesn't guarantee viewability. So if you place the ad above the fold, you'll get a range of 48 to 96% viewability, but below the fold, the rates are lower, but can reach up to 67%. Another issue is that while the viewability rates are higher on the larger sites when compared to the mid-size or long-tail sites, even within the larger sites, there's room for improvement. Only 74% of the top 100 US sites within the tail runs on average about 61%. And then finally, importantly, I think for the advertisers, and we're going to get into this issue on the panel, the in-view rates vary across sites and placement, but the correlation is only about 0.2 between the viewability and the price paid. So the advertiser really isn't paying a premium for higher visibility. Okay? So these are some of the things that we've learned. And what I want to do now is I want to go to the panel, and I want to talk to the panel about these findings and these issues, get their thoughts on them, and talk about ways in which things could be improved. So Scott, I'm going to start with you, if I may.
Sure.
So you've had a lot of experience over the years in different types of media. What's your take on this viewability issue?
I mean, I'm very happy to see viewability be part of the conversation now about website display advertising. I think it applies differently to all of the media. I mean, you referenced television, and certainly there's some breakage that happens when there's a commercial break and people leave the room or become inattentive, or they're texting their friend, or they're doing something else that's reducing the impact of the advertising communication at that point. With print media right now, we have, for the first time, because of data that comes back from tablets, detailed information about reading. And you know, it highlights the degree to which advertising in magazines is an opt-in thing. People, you know, turn the page and don't pay attention. They're really going to miss the ad. But if they do opt in, you have a lot of communication taking place, and you can count how many seconds that is. And we just never had access to that information. So I think of this as being part of a general phenomenon of advertising trying to interest consumers, and part of that's the placement, making sure that you're in the places where they are. And I think part of it is the mindset that they're in, their receptivity at that moment. Yep. And then there's the quality of the creative itself.
Okay. Were you surprised at these results then? It sounds like you...
They were extreme. But I also think that they probably overstate in some ways the net effective viewability. We did a study a couple of years ago at this very conference, Dave Poltrack, Rebecca McFeeters, and I, that was hooted down, not so much in the room, but I mean, I got a lot of criticism of it back at my company, in fact, that documented banner blindness and said, you know, you've got the ad sharing the space with the creative on the same screen, and people train themselves to not look at it. And we documented it with eye tracking equipment.
Now, these results aren't saying that people paid attention necessarily.
No, it's just saying it was possible for them to see.
But I think obviously one of the major implications here is if the ad wasn't even visible, then by definition, it's not going to have an impact, right? Which brings me, Aaron, to you and your experience at Kellogg's.
Sure.
Dealing with some of these issues. Mm-hmm. I know you have some slides that you
sure,
wanted to show.
I'll kind of go through some of those. So I guess, you know, in the past 12 months, a couple of the things that we've worked on at Kellogg's would be, one, really defining what our strategy and objective for digital is. And along with that, it's kind of in a parallel path And we got very clear, I think we talked about it earlier, is that branding is a direct response. Well, yes, everything is branding to us and recognizing direct response will happen, but as a CPG, we have to use the online space to brand.
Excuse me one second. Could we have Aaron's slides up on on the main
in front of me, but yeah. Okay. Parallel path with that was establishing the measurement framework. So I've often made the comparisons to saying that what we're trying to do is Moneyball for digital advertising, right? Identify these statistics that we believe are most indicative of driving volume through digital. So we know the only way to really get more of our marketing dollars to flow into the digital space is to prove out that it can drive volume at the same kind of level as our traditional media. What's on the screen is where we've netted out for the time being as how we're going to look at effectiveness of digital. You know, how do you define effectiveness of a digital advertisement? Well, for us, it's these three buckets of pre-market quality, audience delivery, and in-market effectiveness. So it's not one by itself or in a silo. We really feel like, you know, we need to do pre-market quality copy testing to understand is our creative, does it have a right to win when it gets in market? And it takes that off the table so that when we're in market and we start to look at what's happening, I don't have to go back and question, well, it was a good piece of quality copy, but now I can start to look at, I think some of the metrics that you're addressing here is who is the impression going to? If this is a Rice Krispies ad that's very clearly a piece of creative talking about making treats with my kids aimed at mom, but it's not going to mom, it has very little impact. And
do you want to go to the next?
Yep.
The next slide.
Sure. And so,
there you go.
Not go too far. So what we're able to do is, like, in almost real time, look at some of these data, and I think this is to your point, Jana, around you know, the price that you're paying doesn't always match up with the results that you're seeing, and we want to be able to get the most out of every dollar that we spend. So see here are some real examples of viewability, the lift in awareness we were seeing from a survey-based standpoint, along with what we were paying for that, right? And it's not about necessarily flighting in and out of one publisher to another. It's about how do we work together to, I think, kind of create the most effective plan in totality. The last slide that I had here just really shares a little bit of what we've seen. As I mentioned, at the end of the day for a CPG, it all comes down to market mix results. And what we've seen as we started to shift our strategy and start to look at these things, the first two market mix results that came in, you can see, and I've just indexed these results as well, you start in year one and where we're at by the first half of 2011, our ROI that was measured through market mix is 5 and 6 times where it was a year and a half prior to that. So really feeling like we've got the confidence behind our strategy that this is working out to drive volume.
Now, what I find interesting about this particular slide is that at least in my discussions with advertisers, especially in the CPG area, they keep saying that their market mix models are throwing back really low values for the digital component of their marketing mix. And so I think what you're saying here, Aaron, is that if one is able to modify the delivery of the media plan in flight, that one is able to improve the ROI.
Yeah, I've always said the key is when we put an input into the market mix models for digital, that input is always impressions, but it's just the impressions that your ad server says were delivered. If that number represents something that is 60% waste, then it's certainly going to deliver a different ROI than if that number begins to represent 70 and 80% quality viewed advertising.
And this is before you even input the viewability.
Yeah, actually, this is when we started to get to targeting and efficiently finding who our target is and getting them in the spaces online.
But obviously, the cost of the websites will factor a lot there. If one's an $8 CPM and one's a $2.50 CPM, and even if they were delivering the same amount of lift, ROI would be very different.
Very different.
So this all sounds very, very positive certainly for digital. But Keith, let me ask you, what's from the agency perspective, how easy or difficult is it modifying these plans as they're being executed in real time?
Good question. It depends how the buys are structured. Much easier with an ad network, sometimes more difficult with a publisher. But if we have data, we can usually take it to a rational partner on the selling side, and we can work something out.
So you think it's possible, obviously, that one can modify in a positive sense the delivery in almost real time?
Absolutely. I'd say near time.
It's a near time.
Near time is a good one.
Absolutely.
So what's going to happen here as this kind of an approach is rolled out? What's going to happen to pricing? Scott, what do you think you can predict here?
I mean, I would expect that if we had perfect measurement, and I think we're still on a path toward perfect measurement with regard to viewability. I think viewability is a necessary but not sufficient condition for having an effect. Obviously, the creative and the receptivity of audiences in different places will have a big effect. The same person may be in a very different frame of mind when they're on Facebook as opposed to when they're Googling something or going and searching for something, or when they're reading New York Times online. And those will all play themselves out. But I think that ultimately, if we assume that the measurement will get better and our ability to track viewability on all browsers and in every instance will be perfected, then it will affect pricing, because ultimately quality, the quality of the advertising proposition for a given brand is what is the most relevant. And I suspect it won't line up entirely with regard to things like medium engagement. I think different ads perform quite differently. That the correlation between engagement with an individual TV show or magazine or website is not perfectly correlated with the appropriateness of a Kellogg's ad in any of those environments. Those are testable hypotheses.
So, Keith, staying with this topic of pricing and contract terms and the like, your agency obviously works with a lot of different publishers. What's the reaction to the concept of guarantees and make goods in digital?
We're seeing most publishers are receptive to the conversation if they're confident in their ability to target their inventory. And a little bit more challenging when you go to ad networks and to a DSP model to get the same sort of reception. But most large publishers are quite happy to sell this way and to guarantee a buy this way.
Is that, Aaron, is that your?
Yeah, we're having great experience. I think I get asked that question a lot is, how do the publishers react? And fortunately, we've had extremely good relationships with all the publishers that we're working with so far to introduce this concept, and how we've been very clear. I think our principle is transparency. We've said, we'll be transparent, we'll share the data with you. We have no issue sharing your results and how they stack up relative to other partners on a given plan. And most of the publishing community has said, well, we believe we can deliver. To your point, Keith, I think we believe we can deliver, and we want to be the partner who helps you drive that ROI. So it's been a really...
So do we have a unanimous vote here that if you were to predict what's going to happen here in this industry going forward, that make goods and guarantees will be the norm in digital?
I guess from my perspective, maybe they will become the norm. I don't think it's as much about, I'm not as worried about creating a new currency as I am, what can we do with this data? I think it's exactly to your point, Scott, this is just one more thing that we can now take out of the equation and say, okay, now I know viewability works. Right. Let me go learn about context. Let me go learn about receptivity. Whereas without this, who knew? Right. Like half the ads weren't even seen. Right?
And I think publishers are going to continue to be receptive to this. I think it's partly because publishers operate with a certain degree of faith in their product. If you think you're putting out a good product and you're attracting a quality audience, and that should be a fertile place for advertising communication, and should be reflected in price.
Keith?
And results.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of information allows us to reprice fairly for both the buyer and for the seller. So if we can reprice based on what's actually delivered in what we bought, and then we'd be willing to pay a higher price.
Now, when we were chatting, getting ready for this, Keith, we were talking about, well, how much accuracy should an advertiser expect in their targeting? And 100% obviously is being unrealistic. But you had an interesting comparison of what you're seeing on digital versus television, for example. Can you comment on that?
Sure, and I think we see this in some of the other presentations today. I mean, if you look at the move in TV, it's very much with a digital mindset to move beyond demographics to get a little bit more crisp on the planning target, as we say, and how much of the planning target we're able to deliver against. So I think there are some parallels happening right now where you're seeing things we do in digital being applied to TV much more frequently, and there's much more receptivity to that.
So would you say that
using set-top boxes and panel matching? And
so here with digital, inherently one has the ability to do some pretty good targeting. Obviously not not perfect, but do you think it's possible that digital might actually then spur the development of set-top box targeting systems in TV, because it's going to be maybe a competitive medium in that sense?
Well, I think from a planning and buying agency perspective, the more we share knowledge internally, and people who worked in digital now work in traditional, I think those sort of expectations are going to be applied to TV.
Okay.
There's no doubt there.
Interesting. Might be interesting days ahead. I want to shift to this GRP metric and the response from the audience. I'm wondering whether the question maybe was interpreted differently from what might have been intended. So you can think of the GRP as being a measure of the delivery of a campaign, or you can think of the GRP as being a measure of, in some way, the effectiveness. Now, those are two very, very different issues, and I'm wondering whether the audience was interpreting it in an effectiveness sense. So let me get some observations from the panel. What do you think of the GRP as a cross-media metric, Aaron?
I think it scares people when they think, are we going to take everything back to GRP? I think that very much to the last point there, digital has raised the bar in terms of transparency of data. So now I can go granularity and transparency, and GRP on its own feels a little bit opposite of transparency and granularity. So I think that that's probably why you're seeing, what was it, 40-some%, and it said 4. So I understand that.
Scott?
Well, I mean, there was a surprising finding, and you're right, maybe people did interpret the question a bit differently. I mean, I view GRPs as indispensable in the sense that you can't get very far along in any analysis without them, but it's at such a lowest common denominator level that it would be a very lazy approach to media planning if you only really worried about delivery of GRPs. Let's go back again to the conversation about mindset. So, I'm very intrigued. I'm on Facebook like everybody else. But I'm very intrigued by, what happened with General Motors a few weeks ago, some other, bad news that Facebook encountered. And, if I think about what people I know are doing when they're on Facebook, they're hanging out with their friends. And they're really not in the same frame of mind that they might be when they are doing a search or they're reading something. I mean, it's a very different mindset. And if, I don't have any proof for that, and maybe people have done some work on it, but I suspect that the mental context of how people are spending time really affects the degree to which they're receptive. And GRPs don't get close to that.
Well, you could argue that about television,
of course
watching a football game with friends as well. But Keith, what do you think about the GRP metric?
I think GRPs are synonymous with the tonnage mindset. So we're going to put out tonnage, we're going to get an ad response. It's a very difficult habit to break, particularly among folks that have worked with GRPs, obviously, for a long time. But I think to your point, Scott, it becomes more about smart planning based on the outcome that we want the advertiser to have. And that doesn't necessarily translate to a GRP game. It's much more about a targeted reach. How many times do we want to reach them with a certain message and a certain mindset by time of day? I mean, it's much more beyond GRPs.
And also knowing something about your path to purchase for that particular product, and how much consideration, how much authority from the environment around it, and all sorts of other things that GRPs don't get to.
I guess I can see it with targeting, and maybe it's not as relevant, but still, if you're paying per impression, it seems to me that you'd want to know. I remember Ted McConnell from the ARF saying, call me old-fashioned, but it seems rather important to me to know what you're saying, to how many people, and how often you say it.
Yeah, which, it's indispensable.
Especially if you're paying for advertising according to those criteria, seems to me to be important.
Okay. Necessary but not sufficient.
Maybe that's what it is, and certainly I think we all agree that it's not an effectiveness measure, right? It's a delivery metric, which I think often gets confused. So unfortunately, we could. I see that we're running out of time here. We could carry on this topic for a while, but I see that David is telling me we have another 5 minutes. So let's keep talking. Let's talk about branding advertising, which is something near and dear to my heart, since we've done a lot of work at ComScore on direct response versus branding. Do these kind of results encourage the movement of dollars from traditional media to digital? Keith, let me ask you that one.
I think they open the door, and then when effectiveness is proved, then the dollars really flood in. But effectiveness has to be on a relative basis, so not just within digital, but having digital relative to some other channels. That really opens the door.
Do you, when you plan a multimedia campaign, do you look at digital as an overlay on top of television, or do you view them as kind of independent media?
More and more, we're looking at digital complement TV. I think everyone knows through research and analytics that they complement each other, and so they create synergy. So in the presence of synergy, why wouldn't we deliberately plan them together? So we're more and more thinking like that.
Aaron?
Yeah, to answer your last two questions there, I mean, I have digital in my title, but by no means is my goal to just move all the money into digital. I want to move the money where it's most effective, and I think the challenge right now is there is no relative base for us to look at effectiveness. I'll give a perfect example related to GRPs, is when we look at our market mix models, there is an effectiveness measure within market mix, which is volume per something. And it's that something that varies. So if it's TV, I say how many units of volume did I drive per GRP, but if I look at print, it's per TRP, and if I look at digital, it's per impression. Well, none of those denominators match up. So as a marketer, I can't look at that and say that, well, TV is twice as effective as digital or vice versa, because I have to do a lot of very fuzzy math to get to that interpretation of, well, relatively how effective are they. So that is the challenge I think we have.
So, turning, Scott, to you, how do you plan the marketing of your print publications versus your digital publications? How do you approach advertisers?
Well, it depends always on the advertiser. We usually start by trying to understand in detail what their objective is, and then we'll create proposals around that are almost invariably multi-platform, and sometimes will involve media units from outside of our company if we don't think that we have the right assets. So we'll strike up partnership arrangements and do other things. Our intent always is to try and figure out what's the smartest way of addressing the particular goals of the advertiser, and that can involve events. It can involve all sorts of things that go beyond a narrow construction of what media we sell.
You mentioned in one of your comments earlier that you thought that tablets are kind of a game changer for magazines. Could you talk a little bit more about? Well,
they're still at relatively small scale relative to the distribution of the printed magazines. From a research standpoint, what is very intriguing to me is we've just never had as much visibility into the dynamics of reading. And it does appear, from what we've seen thus far, that the activity with digital editions on tablets is very much like what it is with a printed magazine. People start at the beginning, they page through, they have behaviors that you can measure passively, and we've always had to rely on self-reported behavior. And as you might have heard with Google's presentation earlier today, the match ain't so great. And so we're suddenly in a world where we're able to view this. So to my eyes, even though digital editions may be small on tablets relative to the size of the printed product, it's a window into what maybe has been taking place for a long time. but we've just never had it open before.
You know, that's the self-reported issue is an interesting one. I have to do a CNBC interview with Maria Bartiromo tomorrow, talking about that whole issue of I think Reuters came up with a study that talked about Facebook's advertising, and it was all based upon self-reported dimensions there. So let me wrap up, Keith. I just want to go back to you as an agency guy. What do you consider the best way to evaluate the effectiveness of advertising as a design? Is there one? Take digital.
Randomized experiments are obviously the preferred design to prove something. But randomized experiments aren't always practical from an implementation or from a rollout perspective. So tough question, but probably some combination of experiments to prove something, and then rightly or wrongly so, econometrics to operationalize the learning.
The reason I'm asking you the question, I know it's not an easy one, is because I'm still intrigued by your observation, which I think is a really, really interesting one, that maybe some of the techniques and approaches that have been developed for digital are actually going to have an impact, a significant impact on the way that television advertising is planned, evaluated, and so on.
One of the things I can say is that representative panels are often very useful in conducting quick experiments and getting quick learnings in a way that you can't do with econometric or marketing mix modeling.
So can I take that as a yes?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
With that, I think we're out of time. I appreciate the time of the panelists, and I hope this was valuable for you. Thanks very much.